Because the moment we begin to see the body as more than chemistry, everything about human potential starts to change. For generations, we were taught to think of DNA as a fixed blueprint, a biological code locked into place from the moment we were born. We inherited certain traits, certain weaknesses, certain emotional tendencies, and we were expected to live within those invisible boundaries. But the deeper I explore the relationship between consciousness and biology, the more I realize something extraordinary. Our bodies are constantly listening to the language of our inner world. Every thought we repeat, every emotion we sustain, every belief we carry beneath the surface sends signals through the nervous system. And over time, those signals influence the environment surrounding our cells. Modern research in epigenetics has already revealed that genes can respond differently depending on external and internal conditions. Stress changes biology, calm changes biology, fear leaves fingerprints inside the body. So does love, gratitude, purpose, and emotional coherence. What fascinates me is that ancient cultures seemed to understand this intuitively long before modern laboratories could measure it. They viewed the human body not as a machine, but as an intelligent field of communication. Emotion was never separated from physical health. Thought was never isolated from vitality. The mind and body were understood as reflections of the same living system. And when I began connecting these ideas together, I noticed a powerful pattern. The emotions we experience repeatedly become instructions. The body adapts to those instructions as if they are preparing us for the future we expect to encounter. If I wake every day in anxiety, my biology slowly organizes itself around survival. Hormones shift, sleep changes, immune responses weaken, attention narrows. The body becomes efficient at stress because stress has become familiar. But if I cultivate emotional stability, presence, and meaningful connection, another pattern begins to emerge. The nervous system enters balance. Healing mechanisms activate more naturally. Creativity increases, energy changes, even perception itself becomes clearer. This is where belief becomes incredibly important. Most people think belief exists only in the conscious mind, but the body believes too. The body memorizes emotional states through repetition, and once a state becomes familiar, it begins operating automatically beneath awareness. That is why two people can experience the same external situation, yet respond in completely different ways. Their bodies have been conditioned by different emotional histories. I have seen individuals carry emotional wounds for decades without realizing their biology adapted around those experiences. A child who grows up feeling unsafe may unconsciously live in constant alertness long into adulthood. Another person raised in emotional encouragement may naturally trust life more deeply. Over time, these invisible patterns shape posture, breathing, relationships, energy, and even long-term health outcomes. What I find remarkable is that the human system is not nearly as rigid as we once believed. The brain can reorganize itself, emotional patterns can shift, stress responses can soften, and when inner states begin changing consistently, biology often follows. But this transformation does not happen through forced positive thinking. The body cannot be deceived by empty words repeated mechanically. Real change happens when thought and emotion become aligned. When the mind says one thing while the nervous system feels another, the body responds to the stronger emotional signal. That is why so many people struggle to create lasting change, even while repeating motivational phrases every day. The deeper process requires emotional honesty. We have to become aware of the unconscious emotional atmosphere we live inside. We must notice the feelings we rehearse daily without questioning them. Guilt, fear, shame, powerlessness, resentment. Many people experience these emotions so often that they begin identifying with them. The emotional pattern becomes part of personality itself. And yet, personality is not permanent. What we repeatedly feel becomes familiar, but familiarity is not destiny. Human biology remains adaptive throughout life. Every moment of awareness introduces the possibility of interruption. When we consciously create new emotional experiences, the nervous system slowly receives new instructions. This is why practices involving focused attention, breath, visualization, and emotional regulation can become so powerful over time. They are not magical rituals. They are methods of changing the internal conditions under which the body operates. I have spoken with people who transform their lives, not because their external world changed first, but because their relationship with themselves changed. Their breathing slowed, their reactions softened, their thoughts became less chaotic, their bodies no longer existed in constant conflict. And gradually their health, decisions, and relationships began reflecting that internal shift. What becomes clear to me is that DNA may function less like a fixed command center and more like a responsive library. Certain potentials exist within us, but experience determines which doors are opened repeatedly. Emotion becomes part of the selection process. Attention becomes part of the selection process. Meaning becomes part of the selection process. And perhaps this explains why human beings possess capacities that often remain dormant for most of their lives. Many people move through life disconnected from their own inner signals. They suppress intuition, they numb emotion, they live in endless distraction. Yet beneath all the noise, the body continues responding to every internal experience. The heart responds, the brain responds, the immune system responds, the genetic environment responds. And once we truly understand that relationship, we begin to recognize that the future of human potential may depend less on controlling the external world and far more on learning how to master the hidden world within us. Because the moment a person discovers that their emotional state is shaping biological expression, they stop seeing themselves as victims of inherited limitation. They begin paying attention to the quality of their thoughts, the rhythm of their breathing, the tension carried in their muscles, and the stories repeated in silence. And as awareness deepens, something unexpected starts happening quietly. The body begins responding not only to survival, but to possibility itself. And that subtle transition is where human transformation truly begins to reveal itself in ways most people were never taught to notice. I have come to believe that one of the greatest misunderstandings in modern life is the assumption that human consciousness is separate from physical reality. We often behave as though thoughts disappear the moment they occur, as though emotions pass through the body without consequence. But the evidence emerging from neuroscience, biology, and psychology points in another direction entirely. The human system records experience continuously. Every repeated emotional state strengthens neurological pathways. Every familiar reaction becomes easier to trigger again. The body learns patterns through repetition, and eventually those patterns begin operating automatically. This is why people can remain trapped in cycles they consciously want to escape. Their conscious mind may desire change, but their nervous system has become chemically attached to emotional familiarity. And this attachment is deeper than most people realize. The body does not always distinguish between what is happening now and what has been emotionally memorized from the past. A memory recalled with enough intensity can trigger the same biological responses as the original event. Heart rate changes, stress hormones rise, muscles tighten. The immune system reacts, the body relives the experience internally even when the external danger no longer exists. When I first began studying this connection, I realized how many people unknowingly live inside emotional echoes. They wake up each morning carrying unfinished emotional signals from years earlier, old disappointments, old fears, old identities. And because these emotions are repeated daily, the body accepts them as normal. But normal is not always healthy. What if many forms of exhaustion are not simply physical but emotional repetition? What if the body becomes tired because it is continuously preparing for battles that no longer exist? The nervous system was designed for adaptation, not permanent emergency. Yet countless people live as though survival mode is their natural state. Ancient traditions often emphasize stillness for this reason, not as an escape from life, but as a way of restoring communication within the human system. In silence, people become aware of internal noise they normally ignore. Racing thoughts, shallow breathing, hidden tension, emotional restlessness. Most people never notice how chaotic their internal environment has become because distraction keeps them disconnected from themselves. But the moment awareness enters the body, change becomes possible. I have seen individuals transform simply by learning to observe themselves honestly, not judge themselves, not force themselves, just observe. They begin noticing how certain thoughts instantly tighten the chest, how resentment changes breathing patterns, how fear drains energy before any real threat appears, and gradually, through awareness alone, unconscious reactions begin losing their power. This process is not instant. Biology changes through consistency. The nervous system trusts repetition more than intention. A single moment of peace cannot erase years of stress conditioning, but repeated moments of coherence begin creating new patterns. The body starts recognizing safety again, sleep improves, digestion changes, attention stabilizes. Emotional resilience grows stronger. And perhaps most importantly, perception changes. A fearful mind interprets reality differently than a calm mind. Two people can walk into the same room and experience entirely different worlds because perception is filtered through internal state. When the nervous system is overwhelmed, the brain prioritizes threat detection. But when the body feels balanced, creativity, intuition, empathy, and clarity become more accessible. This may explain why some of humanity's greatest insights emerge during moments of emotional stillness rather than mental struggle. The mind becomes clearer when the body is no longer consumed by survival signals. I often think about how much untapped human potential may remain hidden beneath chronic stress. We have normalized emotional overload to such an extent that many people cannot even remember what inner peace feels like. Constant stimulation has become ordinary. Endless information, endless comparison, endless pressure, and over time, the nervous system adapts to noise so completely that silence itself begins to feel uncomfortable. Yet silence is often where the deepest biological restoration begins. When we slow down enough to become present, we create conditions where the body can shift out of defense mode, healing mechanisms function more efficiently, the immune system becomes less reactive, hormonal balance improves. Even gene expression may begin responding differently under sustained emotional regulation. This is why emotional mastery is not merely psychological, it is biological. And the fascinating part is that human beings are capable of intentionally influencing these internal states. Through focused breathing, meditation, visualization, gratitude practices, mindful movement, and conscious emotional regulation, people can gradually teach the body new ways of existing. These practices are not about escaping reality, they are about changing the relationship between consciousness and physiology. The more I study this connection, the more I realize that the human body is constantly translating experience into biology. Every emotion becomes chemistry, every perception becomes electrical signaling, every belief influences behavior, posture, decisions, and long-term patterns, which means the stories we tell ourselves matter far more than we think. A person who believes they are powerless often behaves differently at every level of biology compared to someone who believes transformation is possible. Confidence changes body language, hope changes hormonal responses, meaning changes endurance. Even expectation itself can influence outcomes in measurable ways. And this brings us to a profound realization. If consciousness can influence the body so deeply, then human potential may depend not only on what exists within our genes, but on how we communicate with those genetic possibilities through daily experience. The body is listening continuously. It listens to stress. It listens to fear. It listens to love. It listens to imagination. It listens to identity. So the real question becomes this: what kind of signals are we sending into ourselves every single day? Because over months and years, those signals accumulate. They become patterns. They become habits of thought and emotion. They shape the chemistry of our internal world. And eventually, they begin shaping the direction of our lives in ways so subtle that most people never realize it is happening until one quiet moment when they suddenly recognize that the person they have become was being programmed slowly through thousands of invisible emotional repetitions. And once that realization appears clearly enough inside awareness, something extraordinary begins to happen in the relationship between consciousness and human biology, because for the first time, the individual starts understanding that transformation may not begin in the external world at all, but deep within the hidden patterns of perception that silently influence every cell in the body every single day, without ever announcing themselves openly to the conscious mind. And this is where the conversation around human DNA becomes far more profound than simple biology. Because when we look closely enough, we begin to see that human beings are not passive organisms reacting randomly to life. We are adaptive systems continuously interpreting reality from the inside out. The body is always asking one silent question: is this moment safe or dangerous? Every perception influences the answer, not only real events, but imagined ones as well. A stressful thought held long enough can trigger the same chemical responses as a physical threat. The nervous system prepares the body for survival even when danger exists only in memory or anticipation. Over time, the body begins living in the future before the future even arrives. I believe this explains why so many people feel exhausted despite doing very little physically demanding work. Their minds never truly rest. Their emotional systems remain activated hour after hour, day after day. And because the body was never designed for constant emergency, this internal overload slowly drains vitality from every level of human functioning. But there is another side to this process that gives me enormous hope. If fear can condition the body through repetition, then elevated emotional states can also reshape human biology through repetition. Calmness can become familiar, gratitude can become familiar, compassion can become familiar. The nervous system learns whatever we practice consistently. This changes the way I think about personal growth entirely. Growth is not merely intellectual understanding, it is biological conditioning. It is the gradual training of the body into new emotional environments. And once those environments become familiar, the individual begins reacting to life differently without forcing it consciously. I have met people who spent years trying to change their circumstances while remaining emotionally identical inside. They changed jobs, relationships, cities, routines, yet carried the same internal signals everywhere they went. And because the nervous system remained unchanged, life often recreated similar patterns repeatedly. Then something shifted. Instead of trying to control the external world first, they began working directly with their internal state. They learned to observe thoughts without immediately believing them. They practiced emotional regulation instead of emotional suppression. They became aware of how quickly the body reacted to stress signals, and slowly the identity they had carried for years began loosening its grip. What fascinates me most is that identity itself may function like a biological program. Most people assume personality is fixed, but personality is often just repeated emotional memory. We become what we continuously rehearse. The angry person rehearses frustration. The fearful person rehearses uncertainty. The hopeless person rehearses defeat. Eventually, the emotional pattern becomes so familiar that it feels natural, even when it creates suffering. But once awareness interrupts the cycle, new possibilities emerge. This is why moments of deep self-awareness can feel almost disorienting. A person suddenly realizes they are not reacting to the present moment at all. They are reacting to accumulated emotional conditioning from the past. The body has been predicting reality based on previous experience, and those predictions influence behavior automatically. And yet, prediction is not destiny. Human consciousness possesses an extraordinary ability to create new internal experiences intentionally. Visualization, for example, is far more powerful than many people realize. The brain often responds to vividly imagined experiences in ways surprisingly similar to real experiences. Neural pathways activate. Emotional chemistry changes. The body begins responding to imagined possibility as though rehearsing a future event. Ancient cultures understood the power of mental imagery long before brain scans existed. They recognized that focused attention could shape human experience from within. Today, neuroscience continues uncovering evidence that attention itself physically alters the brain over time. Where we repeatedly place awareness strengthens certain neural networks while weakening others. In other words, attention is creative. What we focus on repeatedly becomes amplified inside the nervous system. A person obsessed with danger becomes more sensitive to danger. A person focused constantly on limitation becomes more aware of obstacles than opportunities. Meanwhile, someone who consistently practices emotional balance begins strengthening entirely different biological responses. And this does not mean ignoring pain or pretending life is easy. Real transformation requires honesty. Suppressed emotion does not disappear. It often settles deeper into the body where it continues influencing behavior unconsciously. True healing begins when people become willing to feel emotions fully without becoming imprisoned by them. The goal is not emotional numbness. The goal is emotional integration. I think many people fear silence because silence removes distraction. Without constant stimulation, unresolved emotions become visible. The body begins revealing what the mind has been avoiding. Restlessness surfaces, anxiety surfaces, grief surfaces. But hidden beneath that discomfort is often an extraordinary opportunity for reconnection. Because the moment we stop running from ourselves, we begin hearing the deeper intelligence of the body. The body communicates constantly through sensation, tension, intuition, energy, exhaustion, and emotional response. Yet modern life trains people to override these signals repeatedly. We ignore fatigue, we suppress emotion, we disconnect from instinct. And eventually, many people lose contact with their own internal guidance entirely. But the connection can return. I have witnessed people rediscover profound levels of clarity simply by slowing down enough to listen inwardly again. Their breathing changed first, then their thinking slowed, their emotional reactions softened, and gradually they stopped living entirely from conditioned survival patterns. What emerged instead was something more coherent, more intentional, and far more aligned with their authentic nature. And perhaps this is one of the ancient truths hidden within the mystery of human DNA. Not that we are biologically trapped by inherited limitations, but that human beings possess a remarkable capacity for adaptation when consciousness, emotion, and biology begin working together instead of against each other. The body is not merely carrying out mechanical instructions. It is participating in a dynamic conversation with every thought, perception, memory, and emotional signal we generate throughout our lives. Which means the future version of ourselves may already be forming quietly beneath awareness, long before visible change appears externally. Because every repeated emotional experience is teaching the nervous system what kind of reality to expect next. And once a person understands that their inner state is continuously shaping the biological environment within them, they begin realizing that transformation is not a single dramatic moment, but a gradual process of teaching the body how to experience life in an entirely new way from the inside out. And the deeper I explore this idea, the more I realize how much of human suffering comes from living in contradiction with ourselves. Many people think exhaustion is caused only by work, responsibility, or lack of sleep. But often the greatest drain on human energy comes from internal conflict. The body becomes divided when the mind says one thing while emotion says another. We tell ourselves we are fine while carrying tension beneath the surface. We force ourselves forward while silently overwhelmed inside. And because the nervous system responds more to emotional truth than verbal language, the body absorbs the conflict continuously. Over time, that conflict creates fragmentation. One part of the person wants peace. Another part remains addicted to stress because stress has become familiar. One part desires connection. Another part fears vulnerability because past experiences taught the body that openness can lead to pain. And until these hidden contradictions become conscious, people often repeat the same emotional cycles without understanding why. This is why awareness is so powerful. Awareness interrupts automatic programming. The moment a person becomes conscious of a pattern, they are no longer completely controlled by it. They begin seeing the emotional habits that once operated invisibly beneath daily life. They notice how quickly frustration appears, how certain memories change body chemistry instantly, how specific environments trigger survival responses even when no immediate threat exists. And what fascinates me is that the body responds to awareness itself. When people observe their emotions without immediate reaction, the nervous system begins calming. Breathing changes, heart rhythms stabilize, the brain becomes less reactive. It is as though the body recognizes that conscious observation creates a form of internal safety. I believe this may be one reason why reflective practices throughout history emphasize stillness and attention, not because silence is mystical, but because silence reveals what constant distraction conceals. In stillness, the patterns become visible, and once they become visible, they can begin changing. The transformation usually starts subtly. A person pauses before reacting impulsively. They breathe instead of escalating emotionally. They recognize old emotional loops before fully entering them. These moments may seem small externally, yet internally they represent profound biological shifts. New neural pathways are forming. Different hormonal responses are being reinforced. The body is learning alternatives to automatic survival conditioning. This is where human potential becomes deeply interesting to me. Most people underestimate how adaptable they truly are. The brain continuously reorganizes itself according to repeated experience. Emotional habits strengthen through use. Attention reshapes perception. And because the body responds dynamically to inner experience, even small, consistent changes can create long-term effects that appear almost miraculous over time. But consistency matters more than intensity. A single inspirational moment rarely changes biology permanently. The nervous system changes through repetition. Just as years of stress condition the body gradually, years of emotional balance can also reshape the internal environment gradually. Healing is often quieter than people expect. It unfolds through accumulated moments of coherence, repeated over and over until the new pattern becomes familiar. I think modern culture struggles with this idea because people are conditioned to seek instant transformation, immediate results, immediate certainty, immediate relief. But biology follows rhythm, not urgency. Nature changes through cycles. The body changes through cycles too. And perhaps this is why many ancient teachings emphasize patience alongside awareness. Not passive waiting, but steady alignment. The understanding that meaningful transformation occurs beneath the surface long before visible evidence appears externally. I have seen people become discouraged because they could not immediately measure their progress. Yet internally, profound changes were already unfolding. Their stress responses were softening. Their emotional resilience was increasing. Their relationship with themselves was becoming less hostile. The body was slowly reorganizing around a different internal reality. And this internal reality matters enormously because perception shapes experience. If a person constantly expects rejection, the nervous system prepares defensively before interactions even begin. Body language changes, tone changes, attention filters for danger. Eventually, the expectation itself influences outcomes. But when someone develops inner stability, they interact with life differently. Their energy shifts, their reactions shift. Even the opportunities they recognize begin changing. The external world often mirrors internal conditioning more than people realize. This does not mean every life event is consciously created. Human existence remains complex and unpredictable. But our internal state absolutely influences how we interpret, respond to, and move through reality. And over years, those responses shape identity itself. What interests me most is how deeply emotion influences memory and biology simultaneously. Strong emotional experiences become embedded within the nervous system more intensely than neutral experiences. The body remembers emotional significance. That is why certain smells, sounds, or places can instantly trigger emotional states from decades earlier. The nervous system stores experience not only intellectually, but physiologically. And because the body remembers, healing requires more than intellectual understanding alone. A person may logically know they are safe while their nervous system still reacts as though danger exists. This is why transformation often involves teaching the body directly through repeated experiences of safety, presence, connection, and emotional regulation. The body must experience the new reality consistently enough to trust it. Trust is biological. When the body trusts, it relaxes. Energy becomes available for creativity, healing, curiosity, and growth rather than constant defense. The nervous system no longer wastes enormous resources preparing endlessly for imagined catastrophe. I sometimes wonder how much hidden genius remains trapped beneath chronic emotional stress in humanity. How many people never discover their full creativity because survival conditioning consumes so much of their internal energy? How many extraordinary capacities remain dormant simply because the nervous system has been trained to prioritize fear above possibility? Because when fear dominates perception, consciousness narrows. But when emotional coherence increases, awareness expands. People begin noticing connections they once ignored. Intuition becomes clearer. Presence deepens. Compassion becomes easier. And perhaps most importantly, individuals stop defining themselves entirely by past conditioning. They begin realizing that identity is not fixed. The person they became through repetition can also evolve through repetition. New emotional environments create new biological responses. New perceptions create new behaviors. And slowly, the nervous system begins supporting a different version of reality altogether. Which means human DNA may contain far more potential than we currently express, not because hidden powers suddenly appear from nowhere, but because consciousness itself influences which aspects of human capability are strengthened, activated, or suppressed over time through the emotional patterns we practice every single day. And once that understanding becomes deeply personal rather than merely intellectual, the entire relationship between mind, body, and human transformation begins shifting in ways that can quietly alter the direction of a person's life from the inside outward, in ways that are often invisible at first, yet unmistakable over time. I think one of the most important realizations a person can have is understanding that the body is not the enemy. So many people move through life fighting themselves internally. They criticize their emotions, suppress their instincts, ignore exhaustion, and disconnect from their own inner signals. But the body is constantly attempting to communicate. Symptoms, tension, fatigue, emotional sensitivity, even restlessness can all become forms of information. The problem is that modern life teaches distraction more effectively than self-awareness. Most people are surrounded by constant stimulation from the moment they wake up. Noise, screens, information comparison, pressure. The nervous system rarely experiences genuine stillness anymore. And without stillness, it becomes difficult to hear the deeper patterns shaping our lives beneath the surface. I have noticed that many people fear being alone with their own thoughts because silence exposes unresolved emotion. When distraction disappears, hidden anxiety often rises into awareness. Old memories resurface. Emotional discomfort becomes visible. Yet this discomfort is not necessarily a sign that something is wrong. Often it is a sign that the nervous system is finally being heard. And that changes everything. Because once people begin listening inwardly instead of constantly escaping themselves, they start recognizing how much of their identity was constructed unconsciously. Repeated emotional experiences formed habits. Those habits shape perception. Perception shaped decisions. And over years, the accumulated pattern became what they called personality. But personality is not permanent structure. It is dynamic conditioning. This realization can feel liberating and unsettling at the same time. Liberating because it means transformation is possible. Unsettling because it means many aspects of identity were never consciously chosen in the first place. They were learned through repetition, environment, emotional memory, and survival adaptation. I believe this is why emotional healing often feels like rediscovering forgotten parts of ourselves rather than becoming someone entirely new. Beneath conditioning, there remains a deeper level of awareness, untouched by fear patterns and emotional programming. And when people reconnect with that deeper awareness, their relationship with life begins changing naturally. They stop reacting automatically to every external event. They become less controlled by emotional momentum. They develop space between stimulus and response. And inside that space, consciousness gains influence over conditioning. That space is incredibly powerful. Most human behavior happens automatically because the nervous system values efficiency. Familiar reactions require less energy than conscious reflection. So if stress becomes familiar, the body learns stress. If anger becomes familiar, the body learns anger. If emotional chaos becomes familiar, the body adapts around chaos. But the reverse is also true. When presence becomes familiar, the body learns presence. When calm becomes familiar, the nervous system begins expecting calm instead of conflict. And over time, entirely different biological responses emerge from those new expectations. This may explain why some individuals appear unusually grounded even during difficult circumstances. It is not that they never experience fear or uncertainty. It is that their nervous system has been conditioned differently. Their internal environment remains more coherent under pressure. They recover more quickly from stress because the body no longer identifies constant emergency as normal, and coherence changes perception dramatically. A regulated nervous system sees possibilities where a dysregulated nervous system sees only threat. Creativity expands, problem solving improves, emotional intelligence deepens. Even relationships transform because people begin interacting from awareness rather than unconscious defense patterns. I often think about how many conflicts in human life are actually collisions between unhealed nervous systems. People react from old wounds without realizing it. Fear disguises itself as anger. Shame disguises itself as control. Insecurity disguises itself as superiority. Beneath countless emotional reactions exists a body attempting to protect itself from remembered pain. Yet, protection can become imprisonment if it never relaxes. The nervous system was designed to move through stress and return to balance afterward. But when stress becomes chronic, the body remains trapped in protective mode. Muscles stay tense, hormones remain elevated, sleep weakens, attention narrows. And eventually, people begin identifying with survival itself. That is why restoration matters so deeply. Not temporary escape, but genuine restoration. Moments where the body experiences enough safety to release accumulated tension. Moments where breathing slows naturally. Moments where thought becomes quieter. These experiences may seem simple, yet biologically they are profound. The body interprets them as evidence that survival is no longer the only priority. And when survival loosens its grip, new aspects of human potential begin emerging. Intuition becomes easier to hear, compassion increases, presence deepens. People often describe feeling more connected to life itself, as though perception becomes clearer and less distorted by emotional noise. I do not believe this happens because people gain something entirely new. I believe it happens because chronic internal interference begins fading. The deeper intelligence was always there. Children sometimes demonstrate this naturally before conditioning becomes dominant. They are often deeply present, emotionally responsive, curious, imaginative, and instinctively connected to experience. But over time, many people lose that connection beneath layers of stress, fear, performance pressure, and emotional adaptation. Then adulthood becomes a process of remembering what was buried. I find it remarkable that the human body continues responding positively to emotional alignment even after years of imbalance. The nervous system retains extraordinary adaptability throughout life. Neural pathways can change, emotional conditioning can soften, perception can evolve. This gives me enormous hope because it means transformation remains possible far beyond the limitations many people assume. But transformation requires participation. Awareness alone is not enough if daily habits continue reinforcing the same emotional patterns repeatedly. The body learns through lived experience, through repeated emotional states, through consistent behavior, which means every moment of conscious regulation matters more than people realize. Every time someone interrupts fear with presence, the nervous system learns something new. Every time a person chooses observation instead of automatic reaction, new pathways strengthen. Every time the body experiences safety, trust, gratitude, or emotional coherence, biology responds. And slowly, almost invisibly at first, a different internal reality begins forming. This is why I believe the future of human evolution may depend less on external technology and more on understanding the hidden relationship between consciousness and biology. Because the quality of our inner world continuously shapes the chemistry, perception, and expression of our outer lives. Human DNA is not isolated from experience. It exists within an environment created partly by thought, emotion, memory, attention, and belief. And once individuals truly recognize that they are participating in this process continuously, whether consciously or unconsciously, they begin approaching life differently because they realize that every repeated emotional state is not merely passing through the body temporarily, but actively contributing to the long-term biological patterns that shape health, perception, identity, and ultimately the unfolding direction of human potential itself. Through countless subtle decisions that most people never even realize they are making. Every reaction matters, not because we must become emotionally perfect, but because repeated reactions gradually become the architecture of our inner world. The nervous system learns through experience, and whatever we experience most often becomes easier to repeat again. This is how emotional habits form. This is how identity stabilizes. And this is why transformation requires more than information alone. Knowledge does not automatically change biology. A person can understand every theory about healing, consciousness, and emotional balance while still remaining trapped inside the same stress patterns daily. The body changes when experience changes. It changes when emotions shift consistently enough for the nervous system to recognize a new pattern emerging. I think many people underestimate how deeply the body memorizes emotional repetition. Even environments can become biologically linked to certain states. A particular room may trigger anxiety. A familiar voice may trigger defensiveness. Certain situations instantly activate emotional memories before conscious thought even begins. The nervous system predicts based on past experience constantly. And prediction shapes reality more than most people realize. If the body expects rejection, it prepares emotionally before interaction occurs. If it expects conflict, muscles tighten before words are spoken. If it expects failure, energy decreases before action begins. The body rehearses anticipated outcomes internally, often without conscious awareness. But here is what fascinates me. The same mechanism that reinforces limitation can also reinforce transformation. When people repeatedly practice emotional regulation, visualization, gratitude, presence, or self-awareness, the nervous system gradually begins expecting different experiences. Calm becomes less unfamiliar. Confidence becomes more natural. Possibility becomes easier to perceive because the body no longer filters reality exclusively through survival conditioning. This is why emotional states influence perception so dramatically. Two individuals can encounter identical circumstances while experiencing entirely different realities internally. One sees danger everywhere. Another sees opportunity. One becomes overwhelmed immediately. Another remains grounded enough to think clearly. Their external environment may be the same, yet their internal conditioning changes everything. I have often wondered how many human limitations are actually conditioned responses mistaken for permanent truth. People frequently define themselves by patterns learned during periods of emotional pain or uncertainty. They say things like, "This is just who I am," without realizing they may be describing conditioned survival strategies rather than authentic identity. And once conditioning is mistaken for identity, change begins feeling impossible. But identity itself evolves through repetition. The person we become is shaped by what we repeatedly think, feel, focus on, and emotionally rehearse. Over years, these repetitions influence neural networks, hormonal patterns, behavior, posture, attention, and perception. Eventually, the pattern feels stable simply because it has been reinforced for so long. Yet the nervous system remains adaptable. This adaptability may be one of the most extraordinary aspects of human biology. Even after years of stress conditioning, people can still create new internal experiences capable of reshaping emotional patterns over time. It does not happen instantly. The body trusts consistency more than temporary inspiration. But repeated emotional coherence gradually teaches the nervous system that another way of existing is possible. I believe this is why genuine transformation often feels quiet at first. There may be no dramatic external evidence immediately. The changes begin internally. A person notices they recover faster after stress. They become less reactive during conflict. Their thoughts slow down more easily. They experience moments of peace that once felt impossible. Small shifts accumulate until eventually an entirely different emotional baseline begins forming. And emotional baseline matters enormously because it influences nearly every aspect of human experience. A chronically stressed nervous system consumes enormous energy simply maintaining internal defense. Sleep quality decreases, creativity narrows, decision-making becomes reactive instead of intentional. The body prioritizes short-term survival rather than long-term growth. But when emotional coherence increases, energy becomes available for entirely different functions. Curiosity expands, learning improves, relationships deepen, intuition sharpens, the individual becomes more responsive instead of purely reactive. I sometimes think of the body as an instrument constantly tuning itself according to emotional input. Fear creates one kind of internal frequency. Gratitude creates another. Anger changes physiology differently than compassion. And because these states influence hormonal balance, heart rhythms, neural signaling, and immune function, the body continuously adapts around whichever emotional atmosphere dominates most often. This realization changes how we think about healing. Healing is not simply eliminating symptoms. It is changing the internal conditions that produce certain patterns repeatedly. And those conditions are influenced profoundly by consciousness itself. The stories people carry internally matter. A person who believes life is meaningless experiences reality differently than someone who feels connected to purpose. A person who constantly anticipates betrayal interacts differently than someone who has developed inner trust. Beliefs influence biology because beliefs influence emotional state, attention, and behavior continuously. This is why emotional truth cannot be bypassed through performance. People often try to appear calm externally while remaining chaotic internally, but the body responds to genuine emotional signals beneath surface behavior. Real coherence emerges when thought, emotion, and action begin aligning naturally instead of conflicting constantly. And alignment creates powerful biological effects. Breathing becomes deeper, the nervous system stabilizes, mental clarity improves, relationships often become healthier because interactions are no longer driven primarily by unconscious fear responses. The individual stops exhausting themselves fighting invisible internal battles continuously. I believe many people are far more disconnected from their bodies than they realize. They interpret fatigue as weakness instead of communication. They ignore emotional signals until the body expresses distress more intensely. Yet the body is remarkably patient. It keeps attempting to restore balance despite chronic overload. And when people finally begin listening, profound changes can occur. Not because the body suddenly becomes something different, but because consciousness starts cooperating with biology instead of working against it. The individual becomes aware of the emotional patterns shaping internal chemistry daily. They recognize how attention influences perception. They understand how repeated emotional states reinforce neural pathways and physiological responses. This awareness transforms responsibility. People stop viewing themselves as powerless victims of fixed biology and begin recognizing their participation in shaping the internal environment, influencing that biology every moment. They understand that thoughts are not isolated mental events. Emotions are not temporary abstractions. Together, they form signals constantly interpreted by the nervous system and carried throughout the body in ways science is only beginning to fully appreciate. And perhaps this is one of the deepest ancient truths hidden within the study of human DNA and consciousness, because the more we understand the dynamic relationship between emotional experience and biological expression, the more clearly we begin seeing that human potential is not determined solely by inherited genetic code, but also by the quality of awareness, perception, emotion, and internal coherence we cultivate repeatedly throughout our lives, from one moment to the next.
When we talk about human DNA, most people immediately imagine something fixed and unchangeable. They think of DNA as a permanent biological script that controls everything from personality to health. But modern science has revealed something far more fascinating. While our genes provide a foundation, the environment surrounding those genes plays an enormous role in how they behave. And one of the most powerful parts of that environment is our internal emotional world. This idea can feel abstract at first, so let me simplify it. Imagine your DNA as a massive piano with thousands of keys. The piano already exists inside you, but not every key is being played all the time. What determines which notes are activated depends partly on the signals constantly moving through your body. Thoughts, emotions, stress levels, sleep quality, relationships, and daily habits all influence the biological environment around your cells. This is the foundation of epigenetics. Epigenetics studies how behaviors and experiences influence gene activity without changing the genes themselves. In simple terms, your lifestyle and emotional state can affect how certain genetic potentials are expressed. That does not mean we control every aspect of biology through thought alone, but it does mean the body is deeply responsive to the way we live and feel. Think about stress for a moment. If someone experiences stress occasionally, the body responds naturally and then returns to balance. But if stress becomes constant, the nervous system adapts to survival mode. Stress hormones remain elevated, sleep weakens, digestion changes, attention narrows. The body slowly organizes itself around emergency preparation. Now imagine another person who regularly experiences emotional support, calm breathing, meaningful connection, and moments of gratitude. Their biology begins adapting differently. Their nervous system becomes more regulated, recovery improves, mental clarity increases. The body shifts toward restoration instead of constant defense. This is where the mind-body connection becomes very real. The body listens to emotional patterns continuously. It responds not only to physical events, but also to perceived experiences. A stressful memory recalled vividly can trigger the same physiological reaction as an actual stressful event happening in the present moment. Heart rate changes, muscles tighten, hormones shift. The body reacts because the nervous system interprets the emotional signal as real. This explains why unresolved emotional patterns can influence people for years. Many individuals unknowingly rehearse the same emotional states every day. Fear, resentment, guilt, anxiety, and self-doubt become familiar. And because the body learns through repetition, these emotions eventually feel normal even when they are draining enormous amounts of energy. But here is the empowering part. The nervous system can learn new patterns too. The brain is not fixed. Neuroscience calls this neuroplasticity, which simply means the brain can reorganize itself based on repeated experience. Every time we practice a new emotional response, we strengthen different neural pathways. Over time, the body begins recognizing those new states as familiar. This is why daily emotional habits matter so much. For example, if a person begins practicing slow breathing for 10 minutes every morning, something subtle happens. The nervous system receives signals of safety. Heart rhythms stabilize, stress chemistry decreases. At first, the effect may seem small, but repeated consistently, the body begins adapting to a calmer baseline. The same principle applies to attention. Whatever we focus on repeatedly becomes stronger in the mind. If someone constantly searches for problems, the brain becomes highly efficient at detecting problems. If another person trains themselves to notice opportunities, gratitude, and solutions, the brain strengthens those pathways instead. This does not mean ignoring difficulty or pretending life is perfect. Real emotional growth is not forced positivity. It is emotional awareness combined with conscious regulation. A healthy nervous system is not one that never experiences fear. It is one that can move through fear without becoming trapped inside it. This is why self-awareness is so important. Most people spend years reacting automatically without examining the emotional patterns guiding their behavior. Someone may become defensive in relationships without realizing their nervous system learned protection during earlier painful experiences. Another person may constantly seek approval because their body associates validation with safety. Once awareness enters the pattern, change becomes possible. Think of awareness like turning on a light in a dark room. The furniture was always there, but now you can finally see it clearly. In the same way, observing your emotional reactions without judgment allows you to understand the deeper conditioning beneath them. And understanding creates freedom. One practical exercise I often recommend is learning to pause before reacting emotionally. When stress appears, instead of immediately following the emotion, pause and breathe slowly for 30 seconds. This simple interruption helps shift the nervous system away from automatic survival responses. Another powerful practice is emotional journaling. At the end of each day, write down recurring emotions you experienced. Do not judge them, simply observe them. Over time, patterns become visible. You begin noticing which thoughts repeatedly trigger tension, fear, or exhaustion. Awareness alone can begin weakening unconscious emotional habits. Sleep, movement, and environment also matter more than people realize. The body cannot function optimally while chronically exhausted. Even simple daily walks can regulate stress chemistry and improve emotional balance. Spending time in silence without constant stimulation helps the nervous system recover from overload. Nature, deep breathing, mindful movement, and meaningful human connection all send powerful signals of safety into the body. And perhaps the most important lesson is this: transformation is usually gradual. People often expect dramatic overnight change, but biology responds to consistency more than intensity. Small repeated actions reshape the nervous system over time. One calm breath may seem insignificant, yet thousands of calm breaths practiced consistently can change emotional patterns profoundly. This is how real transformation occurs. Not through force, not through perfection, but through repeated moments of awareness, regulation, honesty, and intentional emotional experience. The deeper truth about human DNA may not be that we are biologically trapped by our past, but that the human system remains responsive throughout life. Thoughts influence chemistry, emotions influence perception, attention influences neural pathways, and the way we live internally becomes part of the environment, shaping our biology every single day. Which means every moment of awareness becomes an opportunity to participate consciously in the unfolding direction of our own human potential.